story opens with Adrian Chase standing in the grand dining hall of the Kelthir Imperial Palace, trying very hard to blend into the background. He's a cultural liaison from Earth's diplomatic corps, essentially a translator and protocol advisor for human delegations visiting the Kelthir Empire. Tonight is the Empress's annual Unity Feast, a formal diplomatic event where representatives from dozens of species gather to celebrate interstellar cooperation. Adrian's job is simple. Stand quietly, assist senior diplomats when needed, don't cause incidents. He's been doing this for 2 years without issue, and he has no intention of breaking that streak tonight. The hall is magnificent, soaring architecture, bioluminescent decorations that pulse with gentle light, hundreds of dignitaries dressed in elaborate formal attire. At the head of the room sits Empress Shalera, the immortal sovereign of the Kelthir Empire who has ruled for over 3 centuries. She's everything the briefings described: regal, composed, impossibly graceful. The dinner service is an elaborate ritual, with each course presented to the Empress first before being served to the assembled guests. This particular tradition demonstrates trust. The Empress eats first, showing the food is safe, and then others partake. It's symbolic, ceremonial, and absolutely central to Kelthir diplomatic culture. Adrian watches from his position near the human delegation as the 5th course is prepared, an elaborate dish featuring Kelthir delicacies arranged in intricate patterns. The palace's master chef personally oversees the Empress's plate, and a server carries it toward the head table with ritual precision. Then Adrian sees something that makes his blood run cold. The server's hands are trembling, not nervously but rhythmically in a pattern that's distinctly wrong. Adrian spent 6 months studying Kelthir physiology as part of his training, including medical conditions and toxin responses. That specific tremor pattern is associated with exposure to a particular neurotoxin that affects Kelthir fine motor control, but doesn't immediately incapacitate. It's also the kind of toxin that would be transferred through direct contact, meaning if the server touched contaminated food and then continued handling the plate. Adrian's mind races through possibilities. He could be wrong, the tremor could be medical condition, stress, any number of benign explanations. Calling out a false alarm would be a massive diplomatic incident, would ruin his career, would insult the palace staff. But if he's right and does nothing, the Empress dies from poisoned food served in front of hundreds of witnesses, which would trigger political catastrophe and likely war. The server is 3 steps from presenting the plate to Empress Shalera. 2 steps, Adrian makes a decision that will change everything. He moves, not toward the Empress, that would be seen as attack and he'd be cut down by guards instantly. Not toward the server, same problem. Instead, he grabs the decorative ceremonial staff from a nearby display, technically a historical artifact, but also a solid metal pole, and throws it with every ounce of strength and precision he can muster. The staff flies across the hall with perfect accuracy and strikes the server's tray, shattering the plate and sending food scattering across the floor in a spectacular, shocking mess. The hall falls into absolute silence. Every eye turns to Adrian, who's standing there breathing hard, having just destroyed the Empress's dinner in the most dramatic and disrespectful way imaginable. He's violated approximately 17 protocols, destroyed priceless ceremonial dishes, and caused the exact kind of incident he was specifically employed to prevent. The Imperial guards move immediately, surrounding him with weapons drawn. The human delegation looks horrified. Empress Shalera rises from her throne, her expression unreadable. And Adrian, knowing he's probably about to be executed or imprisoned or at minimum deported in disgrace, says the only thing he can say: the server's hands. Check the server's hands for dermal contact toxin. And test the food that was on that plate. Your Majesty, I believe that meal was poisoned. The silence in the hall is deafening. Empress Shalera gestures and her personal physician approaches the server, who stands frozen in shock and confusion. The physician examines the server's hands, runs a quick scanner, and her expression shifts to alarm. Dermal contact neurotoxin, exposure within the last hour, and trace amounts transferred to. She uses a scanner on the scattered food remnants. Confirmed, the food is contaminated with Verath poison, lethal to Kelthir physiology in this concentration. The hall erupts in chaos. The server collapses, whether from the toxin's progression or from shock. Security personnel swarm the kitchen. Diplomats from multiple species demand explanations. And Empress Shalera, still standing at the head of the room, looks directly at Adrian with an expression he can't quite read. "Bring the human to my private chambers," she commands. Immediately, Adrian is escorted not roughly but definitely not gently through the palace corridors to the Empress's private audience chamber. It's smaller than the Grand Hall but no less impressive, and filled with Imperial guards who look like they're deciding whether Adrian is a hero or an incredibly sophisticated assassin. Empress Shalara enters alone, dismissing even her guards to positions outside the door. She studies Adrian for a long moment. You destroyed my dinner, shattered priceless ceremonial dishes, violated sacred protocols, and potentially saved my life. Her voice is calm but intense. Explain, how did you know the food was poisoned when my own security, my own staff detected nothing? Adrian explains about the tremor pattern, about his medical training recognizing the specific neurotoxin response, about making a split-second decision based on incomplete information. I could have been wrong, he admits. If I was wrong, I just destroyed my career and caused a massive diplomatic incident over a palace worker with a medical condition. But if I was right and did nothing, I would be dead, Empress Shalera finishes quietly. And my death by poison served at a diplomatic feast would have likely triggered war, as various factions blamed each other. She's silent for a moment. You risked everything, your career, your safety, potentially your life, to prevent that. Why? Because the alternative was watching you die when I thought I could prevent it, Adrian says simply. Everything else was just details. Empress Shalara's expression shifts to something that might be respect. Most beings in your position would have calculated the personal risk and remained silent. Diplomatic protocol would have supported that choice. You had no obligation to act. I had the ability to act, Adrian counters. That felt like obligation enough. Over the following hours, palace security uncovers the assassination plot. A minor noble faction opposed to the Empress's peace policies had bribed a kitchen worker to contaminate ingredients, knowing the poison would be transferred to the server through normal food handling and then to the Empress's meal. The plan was sophisticated enough to avoid detection by standard security protocols. It would have worked perfectly if not for one human with unusual medical knowledge and the willingness to trust his instincts despite enormous personal risk. The kitchen worker confesses under interrogation, implicating several conspirators who are arrested. The server survives thanks to immediate medical intervention. And Adrian, instead of being sent home in disgrace, finds himself in a very strange situation. The Empress wants him to stay. You saw danger no one else recognized, Empress Shalora tells Adrian during a private conversation the day after the incident. You acted when action was personally costly and inaction was professionally safe. You demonstrated both competence and integrity in a moment of crisis. She pauses. I want you to join my personal staff, not as a diplomat or translator, but as an advisor. Someone who will speak truth even when it's uncomfortable, who will act on genuine concern rather than political calculation. Adrian is stunned. Your Majesty, I'm not qualified for that kind of position. I'm a junior cultural liaison. I don't understand Kael'thir politics well enough to. I have countless advisors who understand Kael'thir politics perfectly, Empress Shallara interrupts. What I don't have are advisors who will throw ceremonial staffs across my dining hall to prevent my assassination. I don't need you to understand every nuance of court politics. I need you to maintain the perspective that made you act when others hesitated, the willingness to prioritize truth and safety over propriety and career advancement. She meets his eyes directly. You saved my life. In Kael'thir culture, that creates a debt that cannot be easily dismissed. But more than debt, I recognize value. You possess qualities I need in my inner circle. Will you accept? Adrian accepts, somewhat bewildered by how throwing a stick at someone's dinner turned into a career transformation. Over the following months, he learns that his role is unusual but valuable. Empress Shallara consults him on matters where she needs perspective unclouded by Kael'thir political tradition or court maneuvering. He asks questions that seem obvious to him, but that no one else thinks to ask. He points out assumptions that everyone else takes for granted. He's not making major policy decisions, but he's providing a perspective that helps the Empress make better decisions. Their working relationship deepens into genuine trust. Adrian learns about the isolation of being an immortal ruler, about the loneliness of making decisions that affect billions, about the exhaustion of never quite knowing who to trust when everyone wants something from you. Empress Shallara learns about human persistence, about the value of outsider perspective, about someone who treats her as a person who can be wrong rather than an infallible symbol who must be obeyed. One evening, about a year after the poisoning incident, they're reviewing reports when Empress Shallara asks him something unexpected. Do you regret throwing that staff? If you had known the consequences, the investigation, the political fallout, the changes to your life, would you still act the same way? Adrian considers this carefully. The investigation exposed a serious security weakness. The political fallout removed conspirators who were planning more violence. The changes to my life have been complicated but ultimately positive. He pauses, but honestly in that moment I wasn't thinking about any of that. I just saw someone about to eat poisoned food and knew I could stop it. Everything else was just consequences. That's why I trust you, Empress Shallara says quietly. Because you act on principle rather than calculation. Because you'll tell me truths others won't, because you value honesty over advancement. Because you demonstrated in the most dramatic way possible that you see me as a person worth saving rather than just a political symbol. She's quiet for a moment. You shattered a poison plate before it reached me. What happened next shocked everyone because a junior human diplomat became one of my most valued advisors. But what shocks me most is how rare it is to find someone who will act with integrity when integrity is costly. As years pass, Adrian becomes an established part of Empress Shalara's inner council. Though his role remains unusual, he's not a political advisor in the traditional sense, but rather a trusted perspective who helps her see beyond the assumptions of Kael'thir culture and court politics. He prevents several more subtle problems by asking questions that seem naive but expose flawed assumptions. He becomes known as the human who broke the Empress's dinner, a story that's told as both humor and serious example of integrity in action. The assassination attempt Adrian prevented is later revealed to be part of a larger conspiracy that could have destabilized the Empire. By acting when he did, Adrian not only saved Empress Shalara's life, but also triggered the investigation that exposed and dismantled a broader threat. The palace security protocols are completely overhauled, incorporating some of Adrian's suggestions about recognizing subtle physiological signs of toxin exposure. One day, during a formal ceremony honoring Adrian for his continued service, Empress Shalara addresses the assembled court. 5 years ago, a human diplomatic liaison destroyed my dinner in spectacular fashion, violating numerous protocols and causing what appeared to be a catastrophic incident. Many called for his punishment. Some suggested he was part of the assassination plot himself. She pauses, letting the memory settle. Instead, his actions saved my life and exposed conspirators who threatened our empire's stability. This human demonstrated something we value in theory but rarely see in practice: the courage to act on conviction even when the personal cost is enormous. She gestures to Adrian. He continues to serve with that same integrity, challenging assumptions, asking uncomfortable questions, prioritizing truth over politics. He reminds us that sometimes the most important actions are the ones that seem foolish or reckless in the moment, but that come from genuine concern for others rather than calculated self-interest. Adrian, standing before the court, thinks about that moment 5 years ago when he grabbed a ceremonial staff and threw it across the dining hall. He couldn't have predicted what would happen next. The investigation, the political changes, his new role, his relationship with Empress Shalara. All he knew in that moment was that someone was about to be poisoned and he thought he could stop it. Everything else followed from that one choice: to act on integrity rather than calculation, to risk everything for someone else's safety, to trust his judgment even when it meant violating every protocol he was taught to follow. The human shattered the poison plate before it reached the Empress. What happened next shocked everyone, not just because it prevented an assassination, but because it demonstrated something rare and valuable. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is act with conviction when action is costly, trust your instincts when trust is risky, and choose integrity over safety when the stakes are highest. Years later, when historians examine the period of stability and reform in the Kael'thir Empire, they trace many changes back to an unlikely catalyst: a human who threw a